Good morning. I am happy to be home. First, thank you, Pastor Ubara, for having me here. Appreciate that. And seeing Auntie Zoe and Leslie here as well. And to see all of your faces. I don't know what it is, but you're obviously either drinking some water or your cream that you're using, because none of you have wrinkles. You look the same. And obviously for us, it's a very special Sabbath, especially to have Dad with us here today. And I really want to thank you and extend our sincere gratitude to the staff at Penang Adventist Hospital, particularly Dr. Dickey and Dr. Calvin. Thank you so much for taking care of my dad. This morning, I would like to talk about the book of Jonah. If you haven't read the book of Jonah lately, I really suggest that you go home this afternoon. It's only 4 chapters. In 10 to 15 minutes, you can finish it. But to me, it's one of my most favorite books in the whole Bible. This is my dog, Flynn. He's 5 years old. He's a little Pekingese. He's about 10 pounds, so he's a little guy. He's a rescue dog. That means that he was found wandering, and I was able to, through an organization, adopt him. The thing about Flynn is that he's a runner. He likes to run away. So one day, I was actually heading to a Wednesday night Bible study group, and I was running late. I didn't have the time to take the dogs out for their walk, so I thought, okay, I'll go to the Bible study, I'll take the dogs with me, and then I'll take them for a walk. As I came out of the Bible study after it was finished, Flynn was in the front seat on my car seat, and when I opened the car door, he jumped out of the car and he started running down the middle of this neighborhood street. My first reaction was just sheer anger. I was like, what? Flynn, come here, come. And I'm running after him, and he is running down the middle of the street, and I'm shouting, and I'm running after him. I'm so angry at him. I finally grabbed him and spanked him. I yelled at him. I threw him in the car. I was so mad, because really it wasn't that I was mad. It was I was fearful, right? I was fearful that he would get hurt, but that was my reaction to him. So I got in my car and I'm driving and I'm like mumbling under my breath. And as I come to the main intersection, there was a stoplight there, and I'm the first car. As I pulled up to that main intersection, in front of my very eyes, a 5-car pileup of an accident took place, where this car came and just smashed into 4 other cars that were coming across the street like that. You could hear the squishing and the metal just starting to gnarl. There was smoke coming out. There was glass all over. In fact, one of the cars started spinning and was heading towards my car. And thank the Lord, it stopped like 3 feet from my car. The person was slumped over. It turned out later that person actually died. And I'm watching this whole thing like I'm watching a Hollywood movie in totally disbelief that this is happening in front of me. I quickly called 911 to get the police and ambulance out there. And as I'm sitting there in the car waiting for the police and ambulance, I start to, breathe deeply, try to slow my mind down, get a little bit more peaceful. And there was that aha moment that if I had been there any sooner in that intersection, I would have been part of that accident. God used a disobedient little dog to save my life. We're going to talk today about God using a disobedient prophet to save many lives. First, I would like to share with you about the fact that when I think about my story, our emotions and our thoughts are powerful energizers that direct how our body typically reacts. So with Flynn, I was in a fear mode. So immediately my body was to go after him and try to catch him. And then, of course, I'm mad because that stems from being in a fearful area. And all the physiological responses that come from it comes from my thoughts. We find that with emotions and thoughts, they stimulate the brain to fire in particular patterns, and so the actions that we take, whether you take an action or you don't take an action, it all stems from how your brain is thinking, whether it is thinking in either 2 main modes, love or fear. One thing I found interesting as I was studying about the neurological aspects of this is that our brain cannot process the emotions love and fear at the same time. You're either going to be thinking in love or you're either going to be thinking in fear. You can't do it at the same time. It's not possible. So the emotions and thoughts of love or fear decide how we take action and the choices that we make. Here are some examples of, if we were to break it down, of love and fear. If we think about it, love is when you have empathy, compassion for someone else, joy, gratitude. I don't know if you've seen recently, but there's this thing now on Facebook about a gratitude challenge. Someone will challenge you, and then you have to say 3 gratitude things on Facebook for 7 days. I think it's a fabulous idea because it causes you to stop and think in love and think about things that you're grateful for in your life. If you've never done that, I really encourage you to try that. Hope, trust, forgiveness, these are all things that come from love when you're thinking about love. The other side of our brain is that if we are thinking in fear, then we are usually thinking in hurt or disappointment, shame, anxiety, stress, and anger. And definitely for me, when I was trying to get Flynn, I was in fear. I was so fearful for him that he had run out of the car, so my response to him from my thoughts became anger. So I'm spanking him and everything. But when I realized what God had done for me and saving my life, my brain now went to love. I am now feeling gratitude. I am feeling joy that God was able to save me and I wasn't part of that accident. So much so that I'm grabbing Flynn after and I'm kissing him and rubbing him and telling him he's my hero. I'm thinking the dog's thinking that his mother is kind of bipolar, right? I went from anger to love right there in front of him. But this is what happens. Our brains and our emotions, how we think, causes us to react in our behaviors. We see that love promotes a sense of safety. Interesting, last year the United Nations put a project out called the Locust Project. The Locust Project was a project that they went into third world countries and they did a survey and they were asking the locals, what is the number one thing that you want, that you need or you want in your life? And these were countries in Africa, in the Middle East, in still parts of Asia like in Laos, Cambodia. And the number one thing that they wanted across the board was not more food, was not more education, was not housing. It was they wanted a legal system that would keep them safe. When you have a legal system to keep them safe, you're able to promote, relationships and harmony. Here we know that fear, and fear, I'm going to break it down in an acronym for you, is called false evidence appearing real. You think that it is real, but really it's false evidence. That's what causes our minds to think in fear. And when we think in fear, we're usually thinking of danger. Oh, I can't do that because I'm feeling that I'm not safe. It's going to be something that has danger. We will disconnect from people, and that can mean you can either fight, you argue, you put nasty things on Facebook about them or something, or you can fly away. Means, okay, shut down. I don't want to talk to you. I'm not answering your text messaging. I'm not going to have anything to do with you. And what tends to happen then is that when our mind is thinking in fear, it blocks our minds from having a reflective thinking in our higher cortex, neurologically. So the moment that you're blocking your higher cortex, you're not being able to make good decisions, especially when it comes to something and change. And change happens all the time. I mean, for us, when we flew in on Thursday, we were expecting to see my parents when I got off the airplane. Instead, my dad's in the hospital. So what do? You have to get into a mode. What are you going to do with that? We could either react from a fearful way of Daddy being in a hospital or a loving way that he's going to get better of being in a hospital. Again, how your mind reacts to this is how your actions deal with it. Quick example of this is, so professionally, I am in corporate sales in the United States. I work with my company that I work for. We do global relocation. My clients are very large global corporations around the world. And so, but one of the things as a person in corporate sales is that you have to make cold calls. That means, you have to pick up the phone and call people you don't even know, complete strangers, and try to get a meeting. I'm a good salesperson, but I hate to make cold calls. My stomach gets upset, my palms start to sweat, my voice gets higher, and usually I have to go to the bathroom many times before I can go to the phone and pick it up. So my boss was telling me, he goes, you know what? He says, you're my best person in closing business, but you have a hard time making those cold calls. I said, yes. And he said, can you think of something that you really love? Put a picture of something that you really love in front of you when you're making that call. And he says, I guarantee you it'll make a difference in how you make those cold calls. So again, this is Flynn sitting on top of my stomach as I'm lying there on my couch. He's king of the house, obviously. The one thing about Flynn is that he has luxating patella. That means that his back knees they're bad, and he has to have surgery. Sometimes when he's walking, all of a sudden he sits on his backside, and his front legs drag him, and his back legs don't work. So I've seen 2 orthopedic vets, and they've told me that Flynn has to have surgery, and I said, okay, each leg is $2,000 US, plus 30 days hospitalization in a full body cast, in a leg cast like that. And you can't do the legs together. It has to be one at a time. So I'm thinking, wow, that's, 4,000 plus because, it's going to have to have some kind of hospitalization. So my goal this year for me at work is that I'm going to get some extra clients in order to pay for Flynn's surgery. So I put his picture in front of my phone, and when I call, I look at that picture and I'm thinking about how much I love that dog and how he makes me smile. He thinks I'm the sunshine of his life and all the funny jokes he plays on me. And when I pick up the phone, I'm calm. My voice sounds pleasant and happy. My sweatiness is gone because I keep looking at something that I love. I'm not fearful anymore. So it really does make a difference where our mind is and how our body and our actions respond to it. So in thinking about love and fear, let's talk about Jonah, God's prophet. When you read Jonah, you will find, if we had to encapsulate him, first, he is a good Israelite prophet. He goes to temple, he does sacrifices, he prays to God. He is doing what God wants him to do. But you know what? As you peel the layers back, you find out that he's a narrow-minded, he's judgmental, he's racist, he's overly religious, he's angry, and he's a fearful guy. God's prophet Jonah. Now, we know in Jonah 1, when God says to Jonah, okay, I need you to go to the Ninevites and tell them that, in 40 days they'll be overthrown. The Bible says, but Jonah. It starts off in Jonah, but Jonah. Whenever you see the term but Jonah, it doesn't mean that you're together. It means you're separate. It's like someone asking me, okay, Ronald, I think I still owe you ice kacang, or you owe me ice kacang. I don't know. We made a bet sometime. So if Ronald were to ask me, hey, you want to do ice kacang tonight? I say, yeah, that'll be nice, but I can't go tonight. Or if you are a child playing and your mom says, hey, go clean your room. Okay, I'll clean my room, but I'm playing with my Xbox right now. So anytime you see but, that means that you're not together, you're fighting against it. And we see here that in Jonah, the first thing he does when God asks him to send a message to the Ninevites, he runs away. It's a fight or flight response, which means that he's in a fear mode. Not only does he run away the opposite direction, the Bible tells us that he's sleeping in this boat that is tossing and turning in about, the historical part says about almost 100 kilometers of wind. So I can only guess that if he's in a fear mode and he's running away and he's sleeping when everybody is in crisis, he's probably depressed. He's not feeling good. He's depressed. He's shutting down. And I know this even more so that his solution of getting away from the problem of the boat being tipped over by the waves is suicide. He says to them, throw me overboard, let me die. When you are in a fear mode, this is where your mind and actions can lead to. So Jonah went from flight to depression to even thoughts of suicide. And in fact, as far as I can imagine, when he was thrown overboard, he was like, okay, we're done. We're done. Now, I've been a little harsh about Jonah this last minute or so let me give a little context to give you a little bit of historical understanding of where Jonah was. Nineveh was actually the largest city in the world at that time. So when God said, go to the Ninevites, God was saying, go to the largest city in the whole world and talk to them and give them my message. It was built by Nimrod. So in today's world, this is where Mosul in Iraq is. Right opposite Mosul in Iraq is the ruins of Nineveh. The circumference around the city is about 96.5 kilometers, which means to enter one gate and to walk all the way to the end to the other side, it's 3 days. It's a huge city. The population is about 600,000, and I understand that's about the size of Kuching. So if you're from Kuching, you kind of get a feel of what that is. And I have here Tokyo, because Tokyo is really the number one largest populated city in the whole world at 32.8 million. So it would be saying if God said to one of you one morning, get on a flight, go to Tokyo, walk the city of Tokyo, and tell them my message. This is a big deal. The Assyrians, who were the people who lived in Nineveh, were evil. They were a violent nation. They were the enemies of Israel. So all of a sudden, we have that whole racial divide because he didn't want anything to do with people who were different than him. They were also known to impale their victims on sharp poles. The Assyrians were actually the one who started the original form of crucifixion. So they would stick you on a pole and they would leave you in the hot sun to roast to death. They were known for beheading people. They skinned people alive. It was their war policy to kill the babies and the young children. So a very violent and evil nation. Again, this would be like telling Jews in World War II, please go and preach to Hitler and tell Hitler God loves them. I mean, see how you can see how Jonah was so conflicted because of the context of his time. On top of that, they certainly weren't worshiping the god. They were worshiping a fish god called Dagon. And Dagon was, the upper part of him was man. The bottom part of him was like a mermaid, like a fish. So an evil, pagan culture. And these were the people God was saying to Jonah, go. And Jonah was like, I'm not going. I don't want to be around those evil people. They're going to hurt me. They don't worship. Why are they going to listen to me talk about invisible God? No. So he runs away. I want to share three things about the book of Jonah that I think are helpful to us. First thing is our breakdowns help us lay it down. I love that the Bible starts, and the Lord. Remember I said earlier it was but Jonah, that means it was separated. Now it's and the Lord. When you see and the Lord, so it's like Hasian and I went to the hospital to see Dad. We went together. Or you and your family came to church today. You came together. So when it says and the Lord, that means God was with Jonah together. God is all about intervening in our lives. It's not about punishment or punitive judgment. It's about intervening and trying to help restore us in our lives. And I love that it says, and the Lord appointed a giant fish. I know that in the children's cartoons it's a whale, but just to clarify, it's a fish, to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Now, looking at the idea that God appointed a fish, in this whole story, God appoints a fish, a plant, a worm, a wind. All of these things are appointed by God. He is so sovereign over the details of our lives. And so when we are going through hard times and we are feeling that large fishes are swallowing us up in our lives when we're going through hard times, recognize that God is with us. He's intervening. And that things that may happen to our lives, just like Flynn running there and I'm having to chase him, that was a moment of a God intervention for me. That I was taking the time not to be at the light. I didn't think of it like that at the time, but as I look and reflect of it, it was an appointed moment of time that God used a disobedient dog to save my life. When you're in the belly of the whale, it's a messy place. And I love this part about Jonah. See, God doesn't take us out of the messy place. He meets us in our messy place. Let me say that again. God doesn't take us out of the messes. I know before I used to pray, oh, I didn't study hard enough. I couldn't remember. Oh, Lord, please give me my memory so I can know the stuff. Well, if I didn't study, you know that wasn't going to happen. But there's a peace and presence to know, okay, if I think about it, if I rationalize, I can answer the questions nicely, and I was able to take the test. So what God does is he does meet us in our messes. And really what these breakdowns or these belly of the whale fish parts in our lives, it allows for our hands to come off, to take our hands away from trying to control what's going to happen, to lay it down and to give it to God, because we're now powerless. I love watching sports, and one of the sports things I love watching is American basketball. You might be familiar with this. This is Magic Johnson, who is a basketball superstar. Magic's mother actually was a Seventh-day Adventist, and Magic Johnson actually grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist church. He became a superstar basketball player, and he no longer stayed in the church, and he lived a very promiscuous life. But he was very famous and very popular. But in November 7 of 1991, the very first athlete in the whole world stood in front of cameras of the news and announced to the world that he, Magic Johnson, was HIV positive. No other athlete had ever done anything like that. Within 24 hours, the National Basketball League kicked Magic out because the players were so afraid that if they bumped into Magic and he started to bleed on them or something during the game, that they would get HIV, AIDS. And so within 24 hours of announcing his truth, he lost his job. He lost that superstar status and an athlete. And when you're an athlete, that's what you know how to do, is to be an athlete. You don't know what else to do. He said for him, that was his belly of the fish moment. He got depressed. He was partly angry, and he didn't know, he said, I didn't know what to do with my life anymore. But during this time, as he was in the belly of the fish for Magic Johnson, he said, I was able to slow down and reflect about my life. The first thing I reflected was how badly I had treated my wife, how much I still loved her, and how I needed her forgiveness and to repair the marriage. So he started working on his marriage. Then he decided, I am going to go back to school. I'm going to go back to business school. He went and got both an MBA and a PhD. And then he started thinking, how can I make things better for the African American community in the United States, especially in the city areas where there are poor people? So he started building businesses like Starbucks or McDonald's franchises, all in the ghetto parts of the downtowns of major cities where basically African American people lived. Magic Johnson, if you look now on the Forbes list, is almost a billionaire today. He now owns both a basketball and a football team. And he said if he had not come to that point of the life where he had to lay it down and realized not only did he lose anything, but it was time to let go and let God do something in his life, that was his turning point. So breakdowns, if you're going through something hard in your life, it is a moment of learning and turning it over and letting God be part of changing who you are. It's a positive thing. Number 2, our God supplies for what he demands. We see this in Jonah 3 verse 4. So now instead of but Jonah, the Bible says so Jonah. This means Jonah now is joining with God. Jonah now agrees to be the messenger for God and give God's message. It doesn't mean that we'll see later, he's still a little angry and he's still a little racist, but now he's not coming from that position anymore. He's coming from God's love and he's coming from God's trust. Why? Because he had that belly in the whale experience. He received God's presence. He saw God save his life. And so now he's coming from love, from trust. And then because he's in that mode, he's now able to go out to Nineveh and preach God's word. Now, it's very easy, though, for us. You saw earlier, if he had fear, he went from fear to depression to suicide. But I think the number one thing usually with fear is not that extreme behavior, but it's what I call the gremlins. And I have it. I'll tell you I have it. I'm going to assume you have it too. It's a human nature thing. And what I call the fear gremlins is the what ifs. So something happens in your life and you think, oh, what if this, or what if that, or oh, you know what? And I can hear Jonah thinking, what if I go and they impale me? Or what if I go to the Ninevites, they don't listen to me? Or what if I go and they laugh at me? Or what if I go and I don't know what to say? What if I go and I sound stupid? Does this sound familiar to you? Have you ever had what ifs? I've had what ifs. When you have what ifs, that means you are coming from a fear place. And the way to get out of that is to come from a love place. And for Jonah, it was being reminded what God did in saving him in the belly of the whale. The blessing that we receive is that to know that God is with us. God has a plan for all our lives, but he doesn't always give us the details. The details will fall in place when we step out in faith, and he supplies our needs. So here's how I'll show you how God took care and supplied Jonah's needs. If you look at this picture here, I guess this would be your left, of Dagon. This is the fish god, right? I said half man, half fish. The fact that Jonah was in a big fish and they worshiped a big fish. When Jonah turned up, they knew this was a spiritual message, that this was not some crazy guy from another country just yelling out his lungs that Nineveh was going to be destroyed. They connected Jonah and the big fish with the fact that they worshiped a big fish. The other thing, too, was that after 3 days in the belly of the whale, that acid gastric juices, this is according to the historical records of eyewitnesses of the account, you can read it online, that Jonah's skin, his hair, and his clothes became white. So he looked like this ghostly apparition that got thrown out of the whale. So believe me, they were now paying attention again to a man who was thrown out of a whale who looks in this ghostly way that came out of the fish. The historical records say that there are eyewitnesses that saw Jonah being vomited out into the sand. And these eyewitnesses, when he started preaching to them, became fervent followers, and they followed him. And as they were following him toward Nineveh, they're calling their friends. By the time Jonah got to Nineveh, he had a huge following of people. He was like the new celebrity of Nineveh. And he's crying an 8-word message. In 40 days, repent, or you will be overthrown. And as he walks 3 days through the city, this crowd got bigger and bigger. He is the #1 celebrity. Everybody's talking about Jonah. So much so the king comes down, and the whole city, from the common person to the king, repents. Did Jonah do all of that stuff? No, that's God. God did all of that stuff for Jonah. God supplied the need that Jonah needed so that the Ninevites would be open to hear him. I love that about how smart God is and amazing. Our last point here is that God extends his grace to us to reveal our deepest issues. Here's the reason why I love the book of Jonah. If you use the word extend, it means to stretch out, to draw out in full length. In the book of Jonah, every chapter, all 4 chapters, is about God's grace. Chapter 1, God's still trying to save Jonah. And he ends up saving a pagan crew as well. Chapter 2, the swallow of grace, the big fish that came to get Jonah. Chapter 3, God's love for the Ninevite people who were lost, a terrible, ugly, cruel, evil culture. All they do is hurt other people. And God had love for them and wanted to save them. And chapter 4, God's love and grace for this narrow-minded, judgmental, racist, angry prophet. I don't know about you, but if I read that and I thought, oh, I wouldn't want to be friends with him. In God's world, God was still loving and going after Jonah. The real reason why Jonah didn't want to do what God wanted him to do was the fact that he's a religious snob. And a religious snob is someone who loves to get God's grace, but they are not able to show grace to other people. In fact, in Jonah 4, verse 2, when Auntie Zoe read today, he says, "I knew it, you're a loving, kind, gracious, long-suffering God." He's quoting Exodus 34:6. Jonah is someone who can preach and quote Bible texts to God himself, but his heart hadn't changed. So when Jonah's a religious snob, what it does, it puts limits of grace. It's not that God can't do more grace, but it will put limits of grace, because now we're putting God in a box. And there is the picture of God in a box where it says, get in there, God, help me here. And you're pushing God into your box. I've gone through this myself, so I'm not here to preach at you, but I'm just saying that, when we have power struggles with God, it was my hidden sins that was colliding with God's grace. And what it does then is I tend to distort the picture of God because I now have an agenda. And until I'm able to let go of those barriers, I really don't let God make change in my life. I look good on the outside. I can quote you the Bible verses. I can do the Adventist lifestyle. But really, am I letting God change my heart? So in closing, let's talk about barriers to grace. There are 3 barriers to grace. When I choose comfort over conviction. When you are in a situation and you thought, I really feel if I go help someone, it's going to be out of my way, that's choosing comfort over conviction. When you know you're supposed to tell the truth, but it's easier to tell a lie because now you won't get in trouble, that's choosing comfort over conviction. Number 2, when I'm blind to acts of grace in my own life. Do I take the time, and this is the big one for me, because I'm always like going. I never stop to think about and reflect on my life. But I need to do more of that because I become blind to seeing every day God works grace in our lives. And thirdly, when my love is misplaced, this is simple. Are you choosing things over people? If you're choosing things over people, your love is misplaced. Things over your children or your family or your spouse, that is when love is misplaced. And these are barriers to God's grace that he wants to do in our life. What God is really doing is that he wants to relate to us kind of like an interior decorator. If you've ever had your house redone, you know that you have to get out of your house, take out the old stuff, and put the new things in. That's what he's looking to do. So I close today on 4 questions that I would like you to think about. I've thought about these myself, and this is what I call quiet time questions. Question number 1, where do we not allow the grace of God to reach us? Just think about it. Take the time this afternoon. Where do we not allow the God of grace to reach us? What parts of my life is still living in fear? And let me just say that fear is a normal human response. So if you're fearful, it's not normal, but we don't have to live in it. And what parts of your life are you living in fear? Am I aware of God's grace in my life? Can you see it? Can you tell someone a story of God's grace in your life that maybe happened yesterday to you? And last but not least, who in your life are your Ninevites? Do you have people that hurt you? That are cruel to you, that bully you maybe, or didn't say nice things to you? Who are those people in your life that are Ninevites? And how can God help us preach his love to the Ninevites in your life? My last story for today is a wonderful documentary that I saw this summer called Forgiving Dr. Mengele. This lady's name is Eva Moses Kaur. She is a Holocaust survivor from Auschwitz. If you look at the picture right there on the right, that is Dr. Joseph Mengele. Dr. Joseph Mengele was a Nazi physician who was doing experiments on twins. If you were a twin in Auschwitz, you were brought to Dr. Mengele. One of the twins would be the placebo, and the other twin would be the one he would do these crazy experiments on. So this is a picture of Eva. She's the one here on the right, and her twin sister Miriam. They were 10 years old when they were brought to Auschwitz at the Holocaust camp. Eva turned out to be the placebo twin, and Miriam turned out to be the twin that they did all the terrible experiments on. And Eva swore in her heart that she would live and that her sister would live, and they would do whatever it takes to live so that they can get out of this place. 3 years later, World War II ended. They were released. They ended up in Israel. Eva then relocated to the US. She married an American guy. And in her early 30s, her sister, who was living in Israel, Miriam, started to get sick. They found out that her kidney was the size of a baby's kidney. And so, excuse me, Eva decided that she wanted to save her sister. She loved her sister so much, she wanted to save her sister. So she thought, if I can find Dr. Mengele, and if I can find the documentation of the science experiments that he did on my sister, then maybe I can find the cure to save my sister's life. So for 12 years, she flew around the world, putting her own money to try to find Dr. Mengele, only to find out two things. One, Dr. Mengele had died, and two, they couldn't find the records for any of the experiments. So Eva now started to look for doctors who were part of the Dr. Mengele team. And she finally found one. And just as she found one, her sister Miriam died. Eva was heartbroken. But she still went to Poland, to Auschwitz, to meet one of these Nazi doctors. And in front of the Auschwitz Holocaust concentration camp that killed her entire family, and now taken her only twin, she read a letter. She says in the letter, I am 55 years old, and I have lived in my mind as a Holocaust victim in Auschwitz till today. I now forgive Dr. Mengele and all the Nazis who have taken my family away from me. I no longer want to live in my mind as a Holocaust survivor. I now live free. See, Eva is still today, she is still living today in the US, going around giving a lot of lectures to university kids to talk about the fact that if we live in fear, if we live in anger, you may not physically be in that prison anymore, but you are still that prison in your mind. For her, she was still a Holocaust victim until age 55, till she stood in front of that, and to that doctor and to other people said, I forgive you. She said, I became a free person because I realized that forgiveness and love is where I receive freedom. The greatest Jonah really is Jesus Christ. What's interesting to me is that every year on Yom Kippur, which is Day of Atonement, Orthodox Jews all around the world will read the 4 chapters of Jonah from the Torah, because they realize that God is calling us to live out and to be graceful to others, and that God's presence is always with us, even at the belly of the whale. For Jesus, he didn't fly or fight or run away from home. He willingly came to leave heaven. He died 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of death and was resurrected so that he can show us salvation and mercy, the greatest Jonah of all. God doesn't give up. If you're going through tough times, turn to Jesus.